vamos a arrancar con la actividad de hoy. Gracias por la espera también y disculpas por la leve demora. Mi nombre es Javier Agustín Rojas y es un placer darles la bienvenida a esta nueva actividad del CEAC. La presentación de esta noche de Gilles Delalex, de Estudio Muoto, finaliza el ciclo que iniciamos este semestre titulado Nuevos Realismos, que empezamos con la presentación de la oficina sueca Frick. Como todas las presentaciones del CEAC se encuentran disponibles en el canal de YouTube de la escuela para verlas después o si alguna no pueden venir. Antes de presentar a Gilles, contarles un poco más del ciclo y dar inicio a la actividad de hoy, me gustaría hacer algunos anuncios de la escuela y del CEAC. El primero es contarles que mañana cierra la postulación para la beca Francisco Bullrich, que es una beca para la cursada de la maestría en Historia y Crítica de la Arquitectura que estamos relanzando este año bajo la dirección de Jorge Francisco Diernur. Hay una reunión informativa de la maestría el próximo mes, el 17 de julio, y creo que hay tiempo para la inscripción hasta finales de julio. La maestría empieza en agosto. Como toda la información de la escuela está disponible en la página de internet, tanto las bases de la beca como la inscripción a la reunión informativa online y demás. Por otro lado, quedan 15 días para la postulación del premio Prácticas Emergentes. Chicos, si quieren pasar, hay un poco de lugar en el fondo, en las ventanas, un poco por allá. Bueno, les decía que quedan 15 días para la presentación del premio de Arquitectura de Prácticas Emergentes. Este es un premio que iniciamos este año, que está dirigido a oficinas de arquitectura cuyos miembros tengan 40 años o menos. Todas las bases y condiciones también están disponibles online. El premio, además de una remuneración económica a la oficina ganadora, consiste en la edición del primer monográfico impreso de la editorial de Arquitectura, que esperamos presentar el segundo semestre a fin de año. La presentación al premio es un portfolio online de 8 páginas para trabajos en Argentina y países limítrofes, así que nos gustaría que compartan esta noticia con colegas y los animamos a participar. Los jurados invitados para esta edición son Mauricio Peso y Sofía Bonner-Richhausen, de la oficina Peso Bonner-Richhausen de Chile, junto a Marcelo Feidel, decano de la escuela, y yo como decanos locales. Por otro lado, esto tiene mal la fecha. Esto tiene mal la fecha, así que me tienen que escuchar por el anuncio. El próximo jueves, la presentación que teníamos el jueves 22 se pasa el viernes 23. Por un partido en River. Esta presentación va a ser del ciclo de trabajo de los demás y va a estar a cargo del arquitecto Diego Gras, de la oficina chilena Gras-Batz. Mañana lo vamos a colgar en redes y en la web, ya está abierta la inscripción con la fecha correspondiente. Acá nos confundimos y pusimos una imagen vieja. Y también, último anuncio parroquial, es que mañana en Lerma, un espacio cultural en Villa Crespo, vamos a continuar con las actividades en torno a la visita de Gilles a Buenos Aires, con una mesa redonda que va a estar presidiendo Isabela Moretti, directora del Archivo y de la Arquitectura, junto a Diego Arraigada, y va a ser sobre los pabellones de ambos en la Bienal de Venecia de este año. Los invito a que vengan, es de entrada libre con inscripción, y creo que va a ser lindo tener una conversación sobre arquitectura en un ambiente más distendido y no exclusivamente académico como la escuela. Bueno, ahora para introducir un poquito más el evento de hoy, me gustaría pasar a inglés, así podemos incluirlo a Gilles en la conversación, que es el único que no está entendiendo de qué estamos hablando. Gilles, thank you for accepting our invitation to present your work today here at the school. It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, many years after the conversations we had in 2017 for the publication of your work in Plot. We are very thankful as well to the Institut Français and the French Embassy in Argentina for their continued support to the school and to these activities, as they would have been impossible without their support. As we talked in the past few days with Gilles, this is the last activity of the semester in a cycle of presentations we've denominated New Realisms, and that intends to address a shift in architectural culture in the past few years, where the ordinary and the mundane have gained attention once again. Taking the cue from the French art movement of the 1960s of the same name, Nouveaux Realismes, the goal of New Realism would be the same: to bring art, in this case architecture, and life closer together. This doesn't mean an architecture that is more pleasant to its human and non-human inhabitants, but one that also assumes the aesthetic of showing its bones, its mechanism, its assemblage. This is, of course, nothing new in architecture. Philipp Ursprung, the Swiss academic, critic, and writer, considers realism a discontinuous thread that runs throughout the second half of the 20th century. One can obviously find this idea of realism in the work of the Smithsons and their interest in regaining the spirit of life in the streets that is visible in Nigel Henderson's photograph and carefully considered in Jesus Vasacho's latest book, Epics in the Everyday, Photography, Architecture, and the Problem of Realism. This is also evident in French architecture of the last 30 years, such as the work of early Jean Nouvel with his Nemesis housing building, or Dominique Perrault's Hôtel Industriel. 20 years ago, in their short text, It Will Be Nice Tomorrow, Anne Lacaton and Jean-Philippe Vassal stated, for an architecture that would be straightforward, useful, precise, cheap, free, jovial, poetic, and cosmopolitan. An architecture that is enough where relevant, an architecture that many times is a lot. I believe we see in Muoto a continuity with these topics, an architecture that finds a precise way to deal with contemporary austerity and scarcity, that focuses on new languages based on an economy of means, leaving behind the dogmas of previous generations of avant-garde that sought transcendence through novelty. It is an architecture thought of as a framework, built to be appropriated, that seeks to contribute to urban life, while at the same time it's aware of its decadence and its limitations. It does not believe in the spectacular. It is an architecture that doesn't try to leave a new imprint in the urban fabric, but instead accepts to work with what's already there. It is something Nicolas Bourriot has synthesized as the will to learn how to inhabit the world, instead of trying to build it accordingly to a preconceived idea. Esto está yendo y viniendo, ¿no? Bueno, vamos a tratar de que se quede quieto. Well, to finish this presentation, Gilles Delalex is an architect who studied in Grenoble, Montreal, Brussels, and Manchester. He holds a Doctor of Arts degree from the University of Art and Design in Helsinki, where he graduated with his thesis, Go with the Flow, Architecture, Infrastructure, and the Everyday Experience of Mobility. This thesis is available online for anyone who is interested, and it's also available on YouTube, I think, as a video clip entitled Stadiorama, which is a fantastic piece, a little bit like Kraftwerk and Ed Ruscha on the mundanity of urban environments. Gilles is a professor in the Paris-Malaquais School of Architecture. He's the head of the Department of Theory, History, and Project, and he's also a visiting professor at Harvard GST. Gilles is the founding partner of Muoto. He founded in 2003 with Yves Moreau in Paris. The activities of the office covers the fields of architecture, urban planning, design, teaching, and scientific research. Their work often features minimal structures that combine different activities, evolve in time, and merge economical and aesthetic issues. Since establishing the office, has realized various projects ranging from master plans, public buildings, housing, installations, many of which are compiled in the 2G issue 79 from 2019. The latest project by Muoto has been recently finished in Venice as the French Pavilion just a month ago. I'm sure we will hear about it. So please help me give a warm welcome to Gilles. Gracias.
Can you hear me? No. It's good to ask, huh? Here? Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear myself as well. Thank you. It's my turn to thank you. Thank you so much for this invitation. This is my first time in Argentina and Buenos Aires, so I'm so happy to be here. And very warm thank you for giving me that opportunity to give a lecture that is quite recent, very much influenced by the latest work in Venice, and that is called Practices of Freedom. You won't see the overall work of our office. I mean, we haven't built that much, but we still try to focus on one theme. That is pretty much summarized by this title, Practices of Freedom. You will understand a little more along the lecture why I chose this title. Basically, it will be around, it's a spoiler, it will be around the question of occupation and how much occupation changes architecture. I mean, how much we know that architecture shapes us, but we may not aware that we do shape architecture in a certain way as well. And if you have that in mind, then you may conceive your project in a different way. So why this title? It came last year. We were invited in Lucerne for a talk by friends, and they asked us to talk about freedom, the notion of freedom, and that's the start. That's why we organized. We did that lecture afterwards. That is an expanded version, and we thought, what a strange idea, freedom, because we thought of ourselves as an office. You know, we're about organization. We like clarity. We like sobriety. We like things to be pretty much constrained, you know, and fit into square rectangles, basic shapes and everything. And also we take a lot of our influences from the realm of the infrastructure, which is another very rational figure. And of course, we're not that much interested in the expression of our individual personal style. This is not really the focus. And there's another reason why we thought it was so difficult to talk about freedom is that there is tradition in architecture, but mostly in social. It's coming from social sciences and philosophy, and also the global media. There's this tradition to criticize architecture because it's a means of control. You know, architecture is about, you know, shaping you, you know, fitting you into special habits and doing what you're supposed to do. You know, it comes from Foucault's reflection, mid-70s, you know, on prisons. And since then, architecture always been criticized for being a system of control. So this is partly true, I would say. Yeah, it does control us. But this is partly false. This is architecture also gives you the freedom to do something else. It allows unexpected actions. If you were in this building or another one, you wouldn't do what you're doing. So it's also a way to permit something that is unexpected, and it may somehow encourage occupation. Because we believe that some architecture encourage occupation and others don't. There are those who do and those who don't. That's clear. We don't like them all. But here I'm really speaking about occupation and not about appropriation, because the theme of appropriation is quite trendy. You know, we talk a lot about how people can appropriate space. But if you appropriate space, you know, you take it for yourself and you exclude others. You take it for certain actions, uses, but you cannot do the others. So it's a way also to restrict the scope of activity. So occupation is a little bit different. To give you an example, I take the example of a stadium that is not just for sport, but a big place, filled with people. You see the stadium that is empty, and you look at beautiful architecture, very impressive, very monumental, and it says something. It says I'm a monument and big infrastructure. And then it's filled with football supporters. It becomes something else, just another place. It has nothing to do. Then the stadium is left empty, with all the trash and everything. It's after the event, and it's something else. And then it's filled again for another purpose, another event, and then it turns something into something else, and so on. So that's an example of how occupation works as opposed to appropriation. The meaning of architecture changes along with its occupation, and it takes another meaning given the fact that the next occupation will change it again. So we thought, okay, let's try to think of an architecture of occupation, and what would it be like? I talked about stadiums, but what else? And we thought mainly of urban spaces. For some reason, urban space, it's a French tradition. Urban space, somehow allows for unexpected events to occur. And we thought of the Arab Spring. Arab Spring, most of the riots took place on roundabouts. And those roundabouts, really, they're so big, they're so undefined that you wouldn't believe that a crowd would gather here. You would imagine that a crowd needs a quite restricted space to fill itself as a crowd. To become, the crowd has to be compact, to be aware of itself. But here, you can see that the crowd, if it gathers on a roundabout, then it stops. It blocks all the flows. So it's quite efficient to gather on the roundabout. And Eyal Weizmann did a really fine book, trying to understand that connection between the roundabout and the crowd. And it's called, his book is called The Roundabout Revolutions. Revolutions. He playing on the double meaning of the word. So there's another example. There's another figure that we thought of. These are the barricades. The barricades are usually amounts of bits of roads piled together to make like little mounds of anything. And this is an installation from Ahmet Ogut, and it's called Bakunin's Barricade. Bakunin was actually an anarchist, and he had this idea to build up barricades and fill them with pieces of art from the National Museum in Dresden. And he thought then the Prussian soldiers, will never dare to destroy them because this art is so valuable. And this is a map of Paris, 19th century, and this figure of the barricade is actually quite important in Paris because this, mostly in the middle of 19th century, it was a period of intense manifestations and riots, and this is the map that summarizes the place where all the barricades were situated. You can see the barricade as a very urban figure here. And there were so many barricades, actually, that Auguste Blanqui, another anarchist, he derived some principles for construction, to build a good barricade, barricade that resists anything. So he published it in a book. It's called Instruction for an Armed Uprising. So of course, this is actually Bordeaux, 68. There's a strong aesthetic of the barricade. Of course, barricades, roundabouts, they're not real architectures. This is even the barricades. You could say okay, this is an image of freedom, but this is like a kind of a romantic image of freedom. Say, yeah, we should get killed, and this is absolute. This is not what we mean. You know, you don't want architecture to kill people, but we thought maybe those figures have a number of characteristics that we may find in architecture. We may try to analyze this architecture in terms of what they allow and what they don't. And we thought, so I've organized the conference around the 4 characteristics that you may find in some architectures or not. And that they would be characteristics that allow for freedom as we understand it. Freedom as the capacity to raise the desire for occupation. So I'm starting with our Saclay building. It's on the outskirts of Paris, southwest. It's a university building. I won't tell you about the whole context, but I focused on the themes. And within this building, there's one theme that we developed and that we translated as internal free space, or it's spaces that are available, but they have no specific function. Basically, that's it. It's there, it's used for some particular reason, but it's not clearly defined what they meant to be. If you look at this building, you can see that, on the first floor, you have this a mezzanine, you have a public path, you have a giant, oversized stair, and you have the roof, where you can play basketballs. And these are a whole series of spaces that are used all the time. I mean, the roof was used before the building was finished. The young guys climb on the building and manage to get to the roof because they see that you could play basketball. And that's the first space that was occupied. Probably because it was difficult to reach. Another space is this passage. It's wet, goes underneath the building. It's actually the park for the bicycles, because it has a few hoops. But of course, it's not just that. We had to give it a function to justify it. It's also a link between a piazza that we designed on the south and the street that is on the other side of the building. That was an important aspect because it's a very urban figure, and the building was actually built before all the roads came, so it was really almost nowhere. So we had to try to think of it in a quite urban way, as the building being sort of an urban space. And there's another figure, which is the stair. The stair is 5 meters wide. It's like a stair for a stadium. You can sit on it, and people can still walk through it. There's no problem. It's so big, and that stairs come from the ground and goes up to the roof. With this particularity that it's inside the building, but it's an outdoor space. I mean, it's raining inside. If it's full of moss now. It's almost all green. But it's like in a klein bottle. You don't know. It's like it's outside coming inside. And we did that because we thought it would be like a vertical street. You could cross the building from the ground to the top without actually entering internal spaces. So it means you can play basketball even though the building is closed. And that was an idea that the building would run 24 hours a day. So this is a place where you meet. You meet in the stairs as much as you discuss in the kitchen in a party. You're doing something because you're not supposed to do it, and that condition, raises the desire to do something you're not supposed to. One is there. Continue on this one. So that's the stair, and you see the ambiguity of that stair, which you don't know if it's inside or outside. That's the klein. It's being within the klein bottle. That's the mezzanine. Initially, it was meant to be meeting rooms and office space. So we argued with the client. He would say, "Well, the budget is really short, so leave it open. It's not completed. There'll be things happening. There's so many students around coming soon, and it's going to be like it's like the canopies place. If it rains, we just wait for each other before going to the restaurant. Oh, sorry, I didn't tell. There's a restaurant, sports room, cafeteria, and stuff like this in this building. So it's a mixed building usually that exists as separate buildings. Restaurant, kitchen, technical building, and then sport rooms. So they are all assembled in this vertical structure, which sort of relates to the idea of the barricade. So that's the mezzanine when it's totally empty. Basically, it's a place for circulation. But as you see, then it's occupied all day long. Just a word on the light, because we stressed the fact that everybody was very scared about those kinds of spaces open to the public, about security and stuff. So we thought, let's bring a strong light here, and that strong light sort of defined the public path. Actually, it's the way you go from the bottom to the top of the building. So it highlights somehow this idea of the vertical street that goes through the building. Second point is the figure of the constraint, because we believe that freedom and constraint always come together. They actually rarely exist as separate things. If you think of the barricade, when you see a barricade, you really want to climb on it. You can't help. You just want to climb on this barricade, and that's the act of occupation. And that's really so. You need something to resist. If you during the French Revolution, if you didn't have the Bastille, the prison, maybe there wouldn't have been any revolution. You need something to fight against. Otherwise you just stand on your seat. You just stay where you are. You have nothing to do, especially. And architecture can bring that. It can bring this constraint that often comes, in our case, from the structure. So that's an example. This is a school for media. We did for a competition in Brussels. And we had a special constraint, urban constraint, that the building has to step back from. I didn't show you the context, but in front of this building there are a few. There's a typical Brussels urban block with housing, and the other side there's a park. So we had to step back, and we thought, why not using that constraint to shape the building and to give it that very specific profile that's like a stair. It's almost like the structure of a stadium, because of course it's nice to have balconies, terraces on the south, for teachers and students to meet. Makes you want to climb the building also, and also, it did respond somehow to the program, because in that school of media, you have large studios, to record for movies and TV shows that rehearse what students may be on TV one day. You have the auditorium as well. But also there are moments where the students at the end of their studies, they do their little movie, and you have very tiny cells at the top. They're tiny, and they spend like 2 or 3 months at the end just on their own making their movie. So this shape, this profile, did allow to have very large black, spaces with no light. You don't want any light in a studio, not much, just a little bit for the auditorium. And you want to have a nice place, a nice little cell, if you spend months on your own at the top. So we thought the fact that every floor has a different quality of light, different condition, allows you to do different things because there are classrooms and offices, and all of those spaces require different depth. So you can, if you would do like a typical regular section with this same depth everywhere, you would just do the same. Basically, that would be difficult. So we thought that this constraint, the fact that every floor is different, this is freedom. This constraint allows you for freedom. So if you think that freedom is an open, flexible space with a long span, I would say that is not true. If you think of an office space, typical office space, standard space, perfectly flat, you got all the appliances, the plugs, the sound is perfect, but you don't want to do anything there. So this is like an idea of freedom, but I think this is not, actually. So that's the building, different facade, and the basic structure of the building. If you want to have another example, the non-architectural example of this idea of this relation between the constraint and freedom, this is a very known experiment from Matthew Barney. It's called drawing restraint, where he attaches himself in order to draw on the walls, on the ceilings, and that's a way of not drawing the way you would draw normally. So it's pretty much architectural in a way, like he's jumping on the trampoline in order to draw on the ceiling. I think this is a good example. Third figure is the figure of the scenario, thinking through scenarios. This is not very original, I would admit that, if you would say so. But it's still an exercise to imagine what a building could do, or how it could be occupied. You may not just think of one occupation, but several ones. So the example is a project competition we did for the Atelier Médicis, outskirts of Paris, tough neighborhood. But the program is very interesting, really exciting. It's a place that is dedicated to street art, dance, occupation through the bodies. There will be dancers, singers, you have ateliers, and you have that what we call the big black box, which is the place, the big main room where you rehearse and where you do spectacles. So we designed it within a square as a way to define public space around this. The metro station is just in front of it, because the metro is coming soon. That's the reason why the building is situated here. And it's a very flat building, and the particularity, its specificity is that the black room is situated in the middle, right in the middle, because it doesn't need natural light, and also and it's like an onion structure. Everything goes around, and you have a first belt of studios, exhibition space, logistics, entrance, etc. There are many activities, and we thought that if we would put the black room in the middle, you could also open it onto the different spaces around. So we thought we wanted to keep it low tech, because flexible, this kind of flexible black box, there's a whole history in theaters, and very few of them work. Usually it's so complicated to change the configuration that it remains the same. It actually doesn't work. This one in Paris that works is in the House of Japan, but it's super sophisticated, mechanical, and we didn't have the budget for that. So we thought we just have to put two sound walls, two mobile walls around. That will help for the sound restriction, and you just can open them. And you can open them on the left, towards the entrance, on the right, towards the logistics with the truck, or on the two sides. On the bottom of the plan, you have the white cube that's still close to the black box. That's the exhibition space, and at the top you have studios. And then all around you have the circulation. So that's an image of the black box. It's actually lit from everywhere. You have the exhibition space on the left and the entrance on the right. Basically, that's the concept. You have that black box and the facade with the curtains all around, and the black box opens on every direction, which allows you to imagine very different kinds of spaces for performance. We talked a little bit with dancers, and what this, I thought in particular Boris Sharmas, who told us, look, nowadays what we're looking for are special places that are inspiring for new choreography. And what we're looking for is just not, the typical wooden floor and all the stuff. No, we want places that help us imagine a new way of dancing, and we can dance on the concrete because we have sneakers. It's good. You don't need like this wood where you can only do like normal dancing. And so I think this idea we thought meant to us that you could dance anywhere. You can dance in the stairs, you can dance in the corridors, you can dance in the logistics with the trucks and everything. So here you can have a parade. Here you can have a little forum, discussions or boxing. They look like the guys are boxing in the middle. This is just a hall. The entrance hall is becoming the place, so it could have an auditorium that is open to the outside. Of course, you can separate the two parts of the room, but that was part of the program. And you can have this huge exhibition space that you don't have much around Paris, and it has this square proportion, and you could do quite different exhibition. That's another. I don't know how many we had. We didn't put them all, but it's almost infinite. Depending on what you can do. So I don't remember how I finished this example. Oh yeah, the last part is the corridor. That's the space that goes around. Actually, all circulation are situated on the periphery of the buildings, where the different rooms can open to. Where this is the exhibition space. And this space, it means that the facade became so thick, so wide, that you could inhabit somehow the facade itself, and you have basically no corridor, no black space within the buildings. There's partly light coming from the ceiling, but this space around became like also an unprogrammed space. It wasn't part of the. It's 5 meters wide. It's actually the size of our office, without exactly the kind of space we work in. Maybe that's why we liked it. And this is a space. This is an unprogrammed space, so it sort of relates to the kind of space we imagined for the Saclay buildings. Also in terms of climate. Conditions, it really helps the building getting warmer during the winter, and it's ventilated, so it helps the building cool down during the summer. That's the sewing studio that is situated on a mezzanine, and we imagine that you would have the backstage. This corridor would be like the backstage. So we installed a few lights, and we thought that dancers would have interesting spaces in order to perform or to improvise something. And the last year we added those curtains because they gave a sense of a very theater feeling. That also help for cooling, for thermal aspects and constraints of the building. It also helps hiding that space and keep a certain intimacy in everybody. You're quite a difficult district, so you can close down the building as well. Very simple section. We introduced a few courtyards, and of course the roof is accessible as another place where you can perform as well. So the tests. So this is where the title of this conference is coming from. This is a book by Maggie Nelson. And this will take us to a last figure that will develop a little more, which is the grid. The grid for us is really a feature or figure of freedom. It says that freedom somehow is not a question of letting go, of just expressing yourself, but it's also a question of measure, of the size of things, and how you govern, how you organize a space. Because a building always implies a certain kind of hierarchy. You always have to decide. Do you put people on top of each other or next to each other, for instance? There's different organization. Who's on the top, who's downstairs, who's on the left, who's on the right, which condition do you give to everybody? So buildings always implies a kind of organization. So which organization do you choose? So that's, in a way, a very political aspect of architecture. It means that architecture forces you to decide how people will organize themselves. It's a way to say that any building is like a small society. We live together. So how do we live together? That's a big question. It's a big question about freedom. And what Maggie Nelson says in her book, she doesn't talk about the grid. She's really talking precisely about this concept of freedom. And what she says there's different kinds of freedom. There's a big idea of freedom, the ideal of freedom, the revolution, and after the revolution, then we're free. But she says, but after the revolution, how long are you free, and what do you do with your freedom? So she says, freedom is also an act, and it's an everyday act. It's something you have to cultivate. You have to know what to do with it, and you have to question it. And it's about, the day after the revolution, and the day after, and the day after, and so on. So it's a question of day-to-day conditions such as the condition that architecture allows or not. Also, she notices that architecture, freedom, is a very tricky concept because any political party, any political idea claims for freedom. If you take any political person and say, I'm going to give you some freedom, you're going to be more free with me. But libertarians, liberals, but Democrats, they all go for freedom. But it's, of course, a very different kind of freedom because they provide very different kinds of organizations. And freedoms is everywhere and very different ideas of life and society. And one example that I know pretty well is the French one, no? Because in France we live in a republican culture. So freedom is part of our slogan, national slogan. It's liberty, equality, fraternity. If you take the two first terms, liberty, equality means that in order to be free, you have to be equal first. This is what the French system says. That's the map of the first departments at the revolution before they were organized with the real. But that's the idea, basically, of the republican system. It's a very flat system. Everybody's equal. You have differences, but there's a system, educational tax system. Everything makes it even. So equality, which may include a slight part of sameness somehow. Freedom necessitates that equality. I'm not claiming for that. I'm just saying this is our way to deal with it in France. And there are lots of discussion, in the media about how far equality should go. Because you're free for any religion, and but still you have to be part of that system that allows your freedom. So in a way, this grid and this ideal of freedom are absolutely connected in France, and of course there are very different systems and different beliefs. That's just one. So we did a little installation with Arnaud Brandelouber I have the screen. Sorry, with Arnaud Brandelouber last year. It was just after the lockdown at the Cité de l'Architecture. This is our national place for architecture. Had been closed down for almost 2 years, and they were reopening, and they suggested that we do something together. So the first, and we sort of played with this Republican, we thought it would be funny to play with the Republican aspects of the building, because this is our national place. So our first idea was to go downstairs in the cave, in the archives. And we thought there was so much material and stuff, for exhibition. We thought, let's exhibit the exhibition infrastructure. We won't show our projects. There are books for that. We had our 2Gs. We made a special 2Gs mixing our two magazines together. And we said, no, let's exhibit the exhibition stuff. And this is going to be like a spring cleaning, as we are reopening, so we'll take off the dust and we'll exhibit the hidden infrastructure of the building. So we thought, okay, let's organize everything. We thought we make a grid one by one and put a small number, and we'll clear things. And the technical team was pretty happy. Say, oh yeah, we got too much stuff. We'll do that. So we started, taking tape, like stupid black tape, and drawing this grid. We started from the floor, and we had kilometers of tape, like 4 kilometers, and we started. Then we went to the walls, and then we had exceptions. Had a strange column here. Pipes. No, we went behind the pipes, but the structure is also on top of the structure. And we started dealing with plenty of exceptions, and that even windows. We thought, should we do the windows? And said, yeah, let's do the windows. Why not? And the stairs. And the stairs already had like a white strip, for handicapped people, to make it more visible. So, there's already some tape here. Radiators, yes, let's do it, yes. And, lift, yeah, not. Won't take the lift. And ankles, yeah, great, yeah, why not? And toilets, I don't know. Anyway, so every day, like half of the office was there taping everything. It took us like a week. And they were calling me, what do you do? What do we do? Do we tape the toilets? I said, no. We started taping it. All right, go for it. And then I think we were sort of dealing with our own Republican system, this overall grid that is meant to cover everything, like the country, the nation is one. We had to face that there were many different places and stuff and things, and we had to make a decision whether they would be included into the grid or not included into the grid. So I think we were just asking ourselves the great questions about how could we arrange our ideal Republican equal Republican system with the differences that are cultural differences. And of course, in the end, we were not allowed to take the stuff from the archive, so we just left the grid as it was, and I think it's still there, because if you untape, you may take off all the paint. So that became like a permanent exhibition at the city. That's another example of the grid, how we used it. The last building we did, it's in Montpellier, south of France. And here the grid is not 1 meter by 1 meter, it's 12 meters by 12 meters. So suddenly the size of it allows to do very different things. So the initial program of this building is it's an office building, basically. The interesting things that it was dedicated to high-tech companies, so young companies that grow a lot, that reduce, that have a very uneven future, and they have to change. We reached this idea of flexibility, but we thought if we do like a normal office building, then they won't come. I mean, it's situated next to the high-speed train station, which is far away from the city center. So they wouldn't come. They are creative people. So what kind of space can we do so there would be something, good reasons to go that far? So we thought, rather than doing a big open space, we'll do small open spaces. So, and we thought we have to divide things so it remains somehow flexible, but at the same time give you very different conditions to work. Good reasons to see someone because its office is in the corner, or on top or downstairs, and so on. So the grid here seems to be a very equal figure, a figure that somehow makes everything quite similar, but what you see that in fact it makes every space slightly different. That is, repetition is not equal to sameness. Repetition can introduce variation as well. Difference in repetition, I won't make too much about it because I'm not a philosopher, but you get the idea by repeating. If you think of for instance, Philippe Glass music, you can see how much repetition can create variations and differences. So that's about the same idea here. By repeating this grid, you can reach different conditions, and we pretty much work on that possibility. For instance, this is our internal street. You see that we often use that metaphor of the street, of the public space within buildings. And some squares are occupied by little free space, like classical, normal office space. Some are atriums, and some are patios. And that's basically the scheme that we started from. That scheme, we thought, okay, you have a core with services and stuff. You have the possibility to reach 4 different office spaces, and then you multiply. It's an infinite grid, and we introduce one street in order to go through the building. And we talked to the mayor at the time. He said, "But that's the Roman city, basically. Montpellier is a Roman city." He said, "Yeah, it's actually the Cardo, the 2 axes, the Cardo and the Cumanus. That the 2 axes, the east-west, east-west and north-south." That define actually the very beginning of the city. So since the building, like the Saclay building was the first to come on the site, basically we had a very undefined context. We were sort of doing the first, we were marking the beginning of the context. That's why this building maybe relates pretty much to the Saclay building. Well, the grid sort of helps you define the various conditions, like, the beginning of France, when the nation starts, how do you start with a nation, and the grid came as a starting point, as a way to organize yourself before you know exactly the content of every bit. So that's the model, and you can see this alternative for the office building. Office building are usually office space is basically the generic office space, but 18, 19 meters wide, you have a central core. Like a third of the building is actually in the dark. And here the idea was that most spaces were lit with natural light. And if you think it's 12 meters deep, then you could do housing. It doesn't have to be offices, So it's a different way of working and giving real occasions to go to a terrace or a patio. I mean, to have to get real differences within the building. That's an office space, for instance, on the first floor. You can see, we can talk about architecture a little bit. You can see the big question was how to make it with being effective with the cost of the building. This is cheaper actually than almost cheaper, or this is the lowest normal cost for an office building. This is really but we had to imagine something that was in between the public infrastructure, public equipment, and the office building, given the fact that they don't cost the same. So the idea was to create that crossover, that thing, that kind of typology that is in between. That's an example of the same square. Why the 12 meter is actually a little bit less than 12 meter, because there you can fit exactly the technical core with the circulation, the toilets and everything, but you can fit an office space. It has natural light from everywhere. This is a meeting room, projection, 360 degrees projection. This is the atrium. And this is the patio that is outside. You introduce various terraces, outdoor terraces on the two ends of the street. And this is one atrium with the meeting room in the middle. So the idea is that from anywhere within the building you can see through. Actually, the building is absolutely transparent. It's not so much anymore because they put partitions a bit everywhere. But the rule was that everywhere you have that transparency, you make a main room. You have an open space, and you try to fit all the small offices where you don't have these transparencies. So you keep that view through the building, even though it's very, very deep. That's the public. That's the ground floor where we've put all the public activities, like the cafeteria. There's a little forum. That's the park for the bikes, and the entrance. Here we work with these concrete blocks that helps for the sound insulation and sound absorption. And you see that all the technical apparatus, all the technical stuff is visible, because that helped us reduce the height of the building and reach a cost of construction that is much lower than normal office buildings. So there's no fake ceiling, no ceiling, no floor, just as it is, the structure basically. That help pretty much. These are the stairs and conceptual model that sort of came at the beginning but became more true in the end. You have entrances all around the building. That means that every part of the building can work independently from the others. So it's the idea, just that it is in the Saclay building. The idea is that instead of having one main entrance, you have a series of entrances, because collective freedom should not oppose individual freedom. So how do you deal? How do you do if you leave the individual expression exist? How do you do that? Well, in the Saclay building, you don't have an entrance hall. There's no entrance hall, actually. Once you get rid of the entrance hall in your program, everything becomes different. You can organize yourself in very different ways. That means if you take the stair in Saclay, you can go to one activity or another. They're all locked, you can lock them up. But you're not restricted to the activity of the other. So that's kind of a political aspect also of architecture. But it's pretty much the same here, but on a very horizontal level. You have entrances everywhere. And in theory, you would never go through the entrance hall. Okay, that's not exactly how it works now, but it's still possible to do it. To imagine that it's not one building, but a series of buildings, and that somehow deals pretty much with this idea of the multitude in terms of in political terms, like the whole is made of the sum of the different parts. The collective is always the addition of many different individualities. So that's Rosalind Krauss. She wrote that very famous text on the grid, but mostly in visual arts. And it's interesting the way she analyzes the role of the grid. For her, it's something very visual. But she realizes when she reads the interviews from Mondrian or Malevich or Reinhardt, and she realizes that whenever they talk about their work, they never speak about the graphite, the paper, the technical stuff. They don't care that much. And they talk about the grid as being like something sacred, something almost metaphysical, and it's a question of belief. And she thinks it's strange how is the 20th century modernity. It seems that there's no belief in God anymore. Modernity has killed God and a kind of mythical aspect of life. And she says, no, that's not true for those guys who are doing grid. I think maybe this grid is actually a way for them to think of a supra-order of something, a very spiritual thing, and at the same time to be super materialistic. So that's what she sees in these artists. And so for her, the grid, both because it looks very rational, and she said, well, so this grid sort of is a way to hide it, but it's also a way for these artists in the visual arts to express it. So I think it's a bit the same in architecture. It's a little trick to shift into more spiritual aspects of the grid. This is a chapel we did, and at a competition, we were in a very romantic park with a little river going around, but it was actually a military installation, and we had to sit in the park for a chapel that really didn't need to exist. Just was part of a. Well, it's an old story. So we had to do that chapel, and that had no specific use except to attract people who may, believe one day in God. Why not? So they were just not really a place to pray, but a place where you would have a spiritual experience. So we thought of it pretty much as. We thought we would do a mountain, actually. We had this idea of the mountain, but the mountain is a figure that exists in most religious texts for a reason. I think it's a cosmic axis. I think the mountain is a link between the heaven and us, God and in the four main religions. So I think the reason why the mountain was here is so much present in all religious texts is because it is because of its verticality. So if you see many religious buildings, they have vertical things. So we thought, let's do a mountain. And we do a pile of things, like in the mountains, when you walk, you got these little piles of stones. So these are little sculptures. We didn't know how to assemble them, but we thought it would also be like a romantic room, like with water running down to it and grass growing onto it. But in terms of structure, we couldn't find a real solution because they're great as a model, but in terms of architecture, that wasn't so clear. So that's why we thought of these grids that we often thought of, they've always been a point of, these are concrete grids that you find along Japanese roads and that prevent the rocks to fall onto the road. And we've always found them so beautiful. I don't know, for some reason, it's hard to explain. And we thought, well, look, they're so brutal and they're so refined in their details. And we thought, yeah, let's use that. This is a real material way to create a mountain. So that's how we shifted into a different technique to build up our little mountain chapel. No, the latest project will be the Bienal project with this funny sentence from Eva Goldman who relates dance and revolution. He says, if you cannot party in your revolution, I don't want it. It's just the revolution shouldn't be about killing each other. It should be about celebration, basically. So we did this pavilion in Venice. I'm not sure. I haven't. This part of my presentation I haven't prepared, so I'm not sure where to start from. The one important theme was about it's about occupation. It's okay. It's part of the theme. Here we started from the idea of the feast or the party. In French we say fête. Has a really open meaning. A party is a bit restrictive to this kind of events, but we were more thinking about the preparation of an event, whatever event. How you prepare yourself in order to accept like a whole bunch of people and prepare the capacity of a place to be occupied. So we thought of this. We started from this disco ball, and that's what we did. That's the installation, which is a theater. We call it the ball theater because it has the shape of a ball. But a ball is also an event, where you dance. In French and in English, it's more or less the same word. There's also something we call the ball culture in the 30s in Harlem. Where gay Americans used to organize themselves as an act of resistance through events that they call the balls, and this is a culture, of course, that has gone through the century, and that we still have today. It has disappeared and reappeared lately. So basically, the idea was to build like a ball theater, like a space that with a shape that somehow relates pretty much to the constructivist architecture, the architecture of revolution in France from Boulez. You can take it, of course, as a disco ball, has this aesthetic of the spaceship as well. But we thought it should be halfway between the spaceship, super high tech thing, and the hut, something really primitive. We thought, hey, yeah, it would be like a spaceship that someone has built in his garage, believing that you would go somewhere. It was actually a response to the theme of the Biennale, Leslie Loco. The title of the Biennale is Laboratory of the Future. We thought, and Leslie Loco was saying basically in her text that architecture should not be an image anymore, it should be a place that is experienced. because this experience is actually where the society occurs. This is society is an experience, and you need a place to live that experience. So we should take architecture as a place that is occupied. In our case, that's how we started, and we thought, let's do a theater. Let's do a theater because a theater is a place of utopia, and we miss utopia today. It's very difficult in our time of crisis to imagine something else. I think a difficult thing nowadays is to think on the long term, for very good reasons. I think we're in time of ecological and economical crisis. But it's also just not a crisis, it's a feeling of crisis. We feel ourselves as being in decline, and the more we say that we are declining, the more we decline. So that's the problem, because then you cannot project yourself anymore into a different place. The thing is that you have to act now. This is urgent, and if you don't do it now, you'll never do it, and that'll be too late. So don't think, just do it. That's basically today's ideology, I would say. There are good reasons to be scared of the future, but I think that's not a good reason to not imagine anything else. And that's the idea that the subtitle is "The party is not over." It means even though you are in a time of crisis, you have to prepare the future, whatever. You have to prepare what is coming next, because you are defining what is coming next. So don't complain that there's no future. I'm talking to the students mostly. Say, don't complain, do it. Prepare it. And if you don't prepare it, then you won't have any future. So this idea was that of this installation that it would call for not exactly a future, but some elsewhere. How can you connect? How can you imagine something, a society that is very different? So that's the section. It will place with the French pavilion is a neoclassical pavilion, not really easy to occupy, and we imagine this boule-like shape, referring mostly to the whole imaginary of the spheres in architecture. Our first job, went too fast. I don't know. That's just our method. We really work with the scenographic and methodology. Doing the storyboards of everything that was round, more or less. And we thought that the object itself should come as the discourse itself. Meaning, we wrote very little about it. We wrote for ourselves, but we didn't. We said this pavilion does not sustain any discourse somehow. It's not a photocopy of a prevailing discourse. The object is a discourse. You can interpret it, and therefore you can occupy it the way you want. So one week every month, there's a ball. There's a different event that is enacted by either dancers or researchers, by students, professors. And every month it's a different thing. It's a different event. And basically the program of the building or the identity, the purpose of the building is actually builds itself month after month. So it's actually the repetition that creates the uniqueness of the building. Deleuze on difference and repetition, he says, look, think of a festival, the more it repeats itself with a different programming, different artist, the more it becomes itself. Its identity is ahead. It's not the beginning. It's not the origin. It's the origin builds itself with time. And of course, you can see that the round shape as being a figure. It can be a head, because it's full of sound. I mean, it's equipped with speakers, and could be the Earth, of course. You can imagine that it's our planet that we have to share. So it raises the question: how do we share it? How has this ball landed? It's too big to fit. Many visitors, especially those who didn't like it, said, "Well, it's too big for that space. You cannot even see it." And we thought, yeah, well, that's the idea. It's like it raises a question, if you like. I'm giving you examples of the many possible interpretations. We could say if we were Bruno Latour, who unfortunately died just before, I would have been so happy that he would see it. He would say, well, it has just landed. Just come here. He's calling to land, and make communions, bring together objects, and could be the parliament of things that he once imagined. And if we would be Peter Sloterdijk, we would say, no, it's about to take off. It's like it's a spaceship. No, it's gonna away, and we need to take distance. Looking at our planet to understand it and respect it. So these are, for instance, two very different views on ecologies, and we thought this was an object that should raise actually questions rather than give answers, because as we know in architecture, we are given many answers. At the moment, we exactly know everything we have to do. So it's a very good way not to think at all. So we thought this object should help think rather than tell us what to do. And I think most pavilions in the Biennale are exactly telling us what to do and what to think. And these are a series of objects that actually inhabit the theater. We thought it would be inhabited by funny objects, and like in a picnic, we thought, if it's landed, you open the door of the caravan, of the trailer, and you spray all the devices, the tables, and everything. So we started designing a whole series of objects. So that's the plan. You see that the theater is really at the center of the building, and it's filled with little objects that we put on the different peripheral rooms. So that's how we enter. You can see the semi-sphere at the entrance. You get wires because there's sound everywhere. It's a sound that is semi-musical, semi-spoken. That's the thing. We had a fairly big artistic theme. So we asked the composers to say, look, we need to feel that we hear voices coming from far away. Playing with the idea of science fiction. That's the sphere being constructed. And the idea is that the whole theater is actually built out of steel, because we thought this is its first life, but we'll be able to bring it somewhere else. You can totally mount it and unmount it. So it will be displaced, it will travel, it will go somewhere else. So we were, of course, criticized for using steel, but we thought, because steel is bad. And we said, but for how long? I mean, it costs a lot of energy, and we thought, for how long? Because if, I'm sorry, I didn't write it, so I'm making a small digression. These are things I was telling some journalists, saying this is not ecological. Say, because there's a lot of energy, all this steel, but that's for how long? Say, look, if you take a car, and how do you measure the energy that the car dispenses? How much does it cost? So you say it's 6 liters for 100 kilometers. It's how much you need. And in architecture, it's 6 liters. Which is very absurd, no? Because you can measure the amount of energy but you don't know for how long. So we thought here, the time of the life of the building is much more than 6 months. That's me. And so we thought one of the coming events in August will be an event that will be called Radio Utopia. It will be like a radio, two research labs coming together with sound acousticians and researchers to create a radio that is capturing sounds from the outside. People are sending sounds, and they will emit also sounds, radio, so it's going to be pretty much like work like a radio studio. These are pictures from the first events with drag queens and dancers. Adds a bit of, strangeness and vulgarity. I think we always need some. It has to be good. The events, that was the first one. That was the opening. We all thought the drag queens would fit good in this kind of space. And these are the objects that are situated all around. This is a table that vibrates, has a very heavy, low sound, but it will be used for the workshops, of course. We try to use as much as possible second-hand objects that we purchased around in the region of Venice for economical reasons, also for ecological reasons, also because we thought they would add to the aesthetics of the sort of handmade, self-made objects. These are we also played on this imaginary of childhood, because we did a catalog that is a comics that explains that the story actually with an author who's called Hugo Bienvenu, who imagined a story where three kids walk through a city and the city is abandoned. There's a cemetery, everybody's dead. They find a robot and they construct the sphere with found objects, that come partly from playground structures. So these are playground structures. You see, these are things where kids hang themselves from, with their hands. Constructions, and that's a ladder that we found, that we added a little constructivist thing at the top, and that's one of the sound objects that also emits sounds. As you pass close to it, it starts reacting. It registers your voice, and the whole sound of the place evolves during the 6 months. That is not like a cycle. The sound really evolves thanks to a very sophisticated program. So I guess that's the last picture. I will add a conclusion. I will prepare my conclusion. So as soon as I have 5 minutes left. So we started with these questions. Can architecture bring freedom? Can architecture be a device for emancipation? And when I say device, I don't just mean a symbol. If you think of neoclassical architecture is the architecture of the tyrants, of the worst authoritarian system, but it's also the symbol of the democracy. So it's always a symbol of the government, whatever. So making a building that is a symbol of freedom is absolutely useless, because you can see that it works both ways. But maybe we thought that's what we suggest here, is that maybe architecture, such as this theater, can be a strategic arrangement to raise at least the desire of freedom, or associated with utopia, like some artistic installation may do, and even military installation could do as well, because these are objects of conquest sometimes. Yeah, so, sorry, that's for the students. I think most architectures today don't get free from the tyranny of public opinion. I think we all try to fit in society, and architecture remains mainly the result of the power that has given the order to build them. So basically, there's no real democratic architecture today, but still we could try to, imagine one. And this is not by being more flexible, more versatile, more appropriable, indulgent, and participatory that architecture can be a means of freedom. That's sometimes about creating the constraints, but choosing the constraints that would make the form very determinant and the use of it very indeterminate. So basically, if you seek indetermination, that doesn't mean that the architecture will be indeterminate. It will mean the contrary. It means usually is the more architecture is precise in its shape, in its design, the more it can bring freedom. So it's not really a metaphor. Forget about the metaphors, of participatory architecture with lots of things, colors and materials that looks like and make it look like it's been appropriated. I did talk a lot about the French Revolution because there's this German philosopher which is called Ludger Schwarter. And one thing he said that really inspired that conference, he said, look, it's funny how the French Revolution started in places, new public spaces that had been invented and created by the royal power. In Paris, he said, they were places of power, and then they became places of emancipation, the same places. And said, he said, of course, it's not because you had a public space that you created the revolution. There's no condition of, there's no causal relation between the two. It's not because they existed that the revolution existed. But if these public spaces hadn't been there, maybe there would have been no revolution, because the crowd, when it gathered, become conscious of being one crowd and say, we are one. And they start acting as one. So he says, it's important to think that's his sentence, we are not simply the products of the environment or the milieu in which we live, we also alter the climate on which we depend, that we are active and we do fabricate the architecture around us. So Schwarter calls for an architecture that he defines between structure and anarchy. So I guess structure and anarchy, I hope you felt that this idea was going through this conference. And trying to finish with a good sentence. He finishes with this idea that I did already develop. He says architecture should be constraining as much as the Bastille, because you don't have a place to refer to. You will not enact yourself. You need something that resists, such as architecture needs to resist. And there's a need for an architecture that can accept all its ambivalence. One that, in other words, would be the opposite of our open, appropriable, and pacified public spaces. That's what it says. Thank you for your attention.
thank you, Gilles, for your wonderful conference, for your time and your energy in presenting the work. I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the auditorium. It's really packed tonight. Just before handing the microphone to the audience, just wanted to make a slight comment that I found very interesting, featuring all the projects even to the next pavilion, about this idea of voyeuristic experience that all the buildings have. I was trying to think what this pavilion had in common with the others, this project, what it had in common with the rest of the buildings. And I noticed it has a bit some mirrors, in some sides. And you made a lot of emphasis throughout the conference about this idea of having a building that you can see through, or being outside a building that you can see through and you can see the activities. It reminded me a lot about this idea of the fan palace, that it's not only use, it's not only activity, it's also seeing those activities. That's an activity in itself. That's also creates public, that creates a sense of belonging. But just thoughts on question. I don't know who wishes to start. I think the audience is a bit shy for the moment.
Sleepy.
No, they want to go to the party.
No, they want to drink. Have a drink. They want to party. We'll speak about that. Themes.
Well, there is some questions, so they're just forming up. What do you think about this idea of your interest in things being seen, with the visibility of things?
You mean transparency?
Yeah, not just transparency, also voyeur. Or it can be transparency, where would that be an asset? Because I think that a lot of your work with this idea of a weak modernity or a decadent modernity, and pinpointing some topics of modernity that interests you, and one could be this idea of transparency. I mean, transparency is what we say it's the first thing that is the opposite of neoclassical architecture. It's the main invention.
Well, I don't know. What is this famous? I don't know if it's phenomenological transparency or absolute, transparency. I don't know. That's another theme for future conferences. Never thought of it. I think the transparency, maybe you said it. Most of our project is the fact that there is an obvious way to show how the things were made. It's like, I think I would say, if we should define this transparency, it's more a kind of honesty. Like, for instance, we thought you should see how it was built, because if you see how it was built, you can see how it would be unbuilt. So the fact that the building is sort of resists somehow this definite stage, I think the fact that you can see how it was thought and constructed somehow says something about its own fragility, even though it remains for centuries. So I guess it's a kind of constructive transparency. It's not that you will see through, but you see through the mind of someone who did it. You sort of exhibit the whole process, and that's probably something that's a theme that goes through the different projects. That you see the column and the beam, you see the screws here underneath, and this can all sort of you saw the feet. You see the fact that you have some legs, for instance, here, says that it's going to fall down. So there are things that can help construct architecture, and instead of reinforcing it sort of raises its fragility somehow. So I think that'd be the kind of transparency I would see in the project. Seeing through is one way of making. That's one. I think in the Ciclo building, since it came in a moment where this kind of architecture was not so much fashionable, we said, well, instead of doing a sign, we'll say the activity will be the facade itself. If you can see that there are people in, you will want to join them, no? So transparency of the facade will act as a sign, because they will show what's going on, and that's good reason to imagine a building has only bones and not much flesh. Because the flesh, the sign, will be the activity itself, and sort of works at night because you see what's going on within the building. And for instance, we worked on the ceilings pretty much because we could see that from below. You would see the design of the building somehow. Transparency is always about what you see. The transparency itself is not so interesting. And I guess this project is very transparent because not finished. We had actually doubts whether we would cover it with a metal grid, like the death ball, with the motorbikes inside, or if we would cover it in terms of physical experience. It was more interesting to have with something opaque than go around and discover that the whole thing is actually empty. But I don't know, I'm not sure how much I can say about transfer. I have to think of it.
Claudia has a question.
Hi, Gilles. My name is Luxembourg. I don't think it's better my French. Thank you for your stimulating talk. I could avoid thinking during your explanation, during your lecture. I felt that you are Jean-Nicolas William dream come true regarding the grid, and because he was one of the architects of the revolution, Durand. And I see that the grid, you are now in half the continent built on grids, because so we know a little about it. And so the discourse about the grid and freedom and the regularity is inside our culture. The question is if you still think that the grid it looks like a strong tool to organize contemporary work, because for fun is academy and for real life is content. So I think that these are two different mentalities, and it's okay. So the question is about the regularity and the grid, and if it is just a very efficient argument to face the contemporary undetermination and at the same time the need of improvement of public and collective life and cooperation. What about the needs of the grid and regularity and the grid as a tool?
Well, I'm not defending the grid, really. It's just, and frankly, it's the first time I speak about it. It's never a theme that we were claiming for. It just came. I thought, once I thought of a lecture would be the little story of the grid rather than the history of the grid through architecture. It's a recurring figure in our work, and I thought there's a moment where I have to make clear where it's coming from, what it means, and so on. And frankly, where it came from is because we did building with this columns every 3 meters, and it's about the same size as the height. And we left the structure visible to just use less material. And that became a very good building in the end. But that was a very constructive way to deal with it. And second origin, I would say, we did several projects in places where there was nothing there when we arrived. There was no context. It was the beginning of a new district. And that's very difficult to start when you have no context. But you have to put yourself in a very utopian perspective, and to imagine that you have to allow the activity without activity. So it's activity without it. And the activity may come, you really hope that it will come, but your job as an architect is not to fake it. It's not to pretend there is. And I think in most places today, it's just fake. It's just, there's so much science to say, oh, this is active. But the question is, how do you make it really happen, or potentially happening? It doesn't matter if it remains empty, in my opinion, because it can happen later. You don't decide that. So the grid in that context is really actually, you're right to say more than anyone where it's coming from and how much it was applying on the urban scale particularly. But I think it's really an object of conquest, like this one, like this object that is about we're trying to conquer the outer space. So it's I would say, very European way of looking to a place that you don't know yet and trying to set the base for something to come. So I think we did use it exactly the same way. I think we came because there was no context, there was nothing, and we thought, let's lay down the possibilities for something to happen. And the grid was somehow like a very logical tool for that. It's a good exercise also to negotiate with who's going to come. So we had discussions about the public. How do you design for people that you don't know? Laying down I think it's an object of negotiation somehow. There's a whole there could be a course on the origins of the grid, the urban grid, and how it travels from Egyptians to now Italy, France, Spain, went back and actually had the strongest impact on urban life in South America. I think we could do like a whole interesting geographical history of it. But I think every time it's not the same meaning actually in Egypt and Etruscs and South America. I think it's a different thing. But somehow it's difficult to. The funny thing, it was very difficult to defend in the context of the Bienal because it's a very maybe European or Occidental way of looking at things when the main thing was actually Africa. So this was our interpretation basically. Was that this is where we're coming from and what we may claim for, what we have in common with this theme about Africa nowadays and decolonization is the wish for emancipation, collective emancipation. And this is our legacy, basically. This is all. But of course, there are many ways to use it, and the grid you can lock people inside a grid, and you can give them freedom through a grid. I mean, this is just a tool, I think, to start rethinking the society. What's there? Where you put your things? Where I think it's politics before it freezes into one ideology or another. I think it comes first. It's a way of started thinking, what was coming next. And I think also comes from the fact that many of these projects are public projects. So I was saying we had a conversation about that. The publicness is a big question because you don't know who the public is. So your client is absent, is not there. You have no client, no real client in the sense that you do a house. Your client says, "This is what I need," and your client here, you have an official client who knows a lot, but doesn't know at all, not much of what's going to happen. So I think in this context, the grid comes as a way of not making choices of what's going to happen, but at the same time making strong architectural choices, which we always have to do. So I think it's sort of negotiating. I think it's a more ambivalent figure than it seems to be. I think it has become a very decorative and trendy figure at the moment, which I think is a lot less interesting. We never used it we never wished to do a gridded building. It just appears. It just happens that maybe sort of a way to refuse the design that is supposed to be the good design. But I think it's a more ambiguous figure than it seems. I think and can mean many things, but I think the fact that the form is very strict and very strong, and the meaning is open, I think is something that kind of probably that's one reason why I used it so much. And every great city is pretty different from another one as well. There's different within the series, and there's a difference between the different series. So there are different sources of difference.
I don't know if there are any other questions.
Thank you very much for your talk. I was wondering, since we're in the context of university here, and knowing that you're very involved in teaching, I was wondering how you're approaching your topics like occupation, set of appropriation. I think it's a really interesting twist to think about very current topics like flexibility and robustness and all of that in architecture, like just switch it, like give it a switch of perspective and thinking it more in terms of like occupation. I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about how you're approaching this in your, like in academia, teaching, exercises that you're doing with the students or.
I'm running a studio with Gilles Delalex, who's a scenographer. We did it together. This project, this theater is actually pretty much finds its origins pretty much in teaching. We run this studio. It's called City and Utopia for 12 years, and every year we find a new thing to raise the desire for utopia, which is exactly what this theater is going to do. So if you want to find an example of what we do, this is pretty true. This is pretty much we ask the students to do on a small scale, of course. Basically, the idea was to imagine a real utopian project and confront it into a site. It's more like a question of method. So you need first to have an idea of what you want to do before encountering a place. That's usually the opposite that happens in schools. You find a place, the context, and then you imagine how you create something. But if you look at the world today, you really see that you have the same buildings everywhere, in the world, same stuff. So the physical context in reality doesn't change much. We have very same buildings everywhere, same stuff. So we are supposed equally smart and clever, intelligent now. But why are we doing the same buildings everywhere? If you say that to anyone, they will go, well, free will, intelligent. No, I'm not doing it. But look, they are the same buildings. So it means there is a context that is coming before that actual physical context. And this is ideological context, is what you believe before you get to a place. So how do you deal with that context? Which way can you not be the victim of ideology? That's a question we raise, and you say, well, you have to create your own. Because it's not the context that is going to tell you what to do. It's you're going to choose. So that's the whole idea of the studio, where students first imagine an ideology that is not theirs. They invent one. They have to construct it through a series of references, readings, and stuff. So, we have different themes like that we found, like religion, revolution, and so on. And then we find a site, and then we make a confrontation between the two, and something else emerges, like a third figure that's beyond ideology and context. And I guess this is exactly what happened that we did, and we also came in the last years. We shifted into more projects that take the form of installations. Basically, we're working with very material stuff, also second-hand found objects, and I guess we actually did what we asked our students to do. This was the first time we had the opportunity to do it ourselves. So, I cannot describe them, but we're actually doing like big installation where we say architecture is not necessarily about drawing the building that you're never going to build, but it's about building and your stuff and drawing what you have built. So it's another way to look at architecture, more about in the act of making, and sort of try to bring representation afterwards. You represent what you've done, and you don't do what you have represented. That's something we had discussed with Arno van der Ruber, with how do you bring back the sort of reversed representation in architecture as such. Put back architecture as the beginning and representation as an outcome rather than the opposite. The idea being that architecture is not necessarily an answer, but it's more an origin of something. We were discussing actually the thing about the pavilions, the national pavilions. Most of the pavilions give an answer to given idea. They were like photocopies, of a discourse. So, everybody has chosen a discourse, national discourse, and then we say, this is a representation of the discourse. So architecture is a representation in that case. And this is why we hardly found any architecture in the Bienal. That's the main reason, that's the main problem. So here we said, we do the architecture, and the architecture will raise the question, and representation will be the show, will be the occupation itself. Enact the architecture, represented in one way or another. For instance, the dancers and the drag queen made this sphere look like a disco place, and Radio Utopia will make it like a radio studio. I think I mean that the occupation is the actual representation of architecture. I'm not sure I'm clear.
I was wondering, so that sounds like it's more like a one-to-one scale, right? That you're working with the students. And I have the sensation that that's like really a tendency right now in France, that a lot of architecture schools, like people start to work with that scale. Do you think that happens now because of a particular reason, or to get closer, like to have more of a feeling towards the architectural detail, construction, or I don't know, like where does that tendency come from?
Yeah, I think any new things is a reaction against the previous. So I guess, there's a strong thing like this in France, in schools. I think there's a lack of making. I guess students I think they want to touch architecture in a different way. I think we've reached a capacity to represent things now. You see with artificial intelligence, we're able to create things that are more real than reality. So we probably reached a level of realistic representation that pushes us, the students, to go into another level. And this is making, the whole idea of making that is not so new, but pretty new in architecture, I would say. Not, the makers and the whole generation of the makers. This is coming into our field as well. It's not exactly one-to-one. I think there's still an ambiguity about the size of things. Like the fact that this is in between representation and actual things. You don't know. I like the fact that this sphere is not. It's a small big object, or big small object. I don't know. I think that moment where you don't know whether it's scenography, structure, or is it a model or something that should be bigger, or is it like a big object? I think this ambiguity in the scale of things is also part of the exercise of using real stuff, but on a different context. I think it's also about experiencing the reality of an object and its meaning, whether you assemble like this or So it's not exactly the one-to-one thing. It's about you making the stuff, and we teachers, instead of giving instruction, having our hands on the objects themselves. So now it's a very different way of communicating, actually. Which is less about corrections, but more about reflection of what next step to do, what are we going to do for next week, because you don't know what the object will be in the end. The brief is pretty clear. It's less we can say. It's also a different way of teaching.
I don't know if there are any other questions. Yeah, Sabine, pasamos para atrás. Gracias.
You talk about how architecture must provide necessary conditions to build an environment that people will make their own. And we see your sketches and your design process about how you imagine all those possibilities. But have you ever been surprised about how people conquer those spaces after time? And have you learned from that, even if it's something bad or good, either way?
Well, when you see how people appropriate their own building, it's always a surprise. I mean, you have this is a discourse we hold. It's always difficult to see the plastic flowers growing, but there's nothing we can say. My opinion is that there's a part of architecture that you should protect that belongs to the author. You still believe in the author, and there's a part that does not belong to the author. the border between the two is not clear. It depends on every approach. I'm not sure how to answer, but it's always a shock to see how. But also, it depends who you call the users. Who are the users you're talking about? If they are really people who sit down and use the space, or they are the clients who actually takes control of the project. Yeah, these are different ways of appropriation. The thing is that architecture, everybody wants to do it. If you want to specify your question, I can answer it more than that.
But I meant if you have ever seen some sort of situation, like you said, I saw the drag queens on this pavilion, and I imagine this place as somewhere completely new and different than if it was for a radio station or whatever. So has that ever happened to you as the building get old?
I guess it takes more time. I think this is like a concentrate. It's a concentration. The fact that every month there's a new thing, and you can imagine that never happens in the buildings change over a very, very long time. So we're pretty safe usually. Oh, it happens. Yeah, we have a building that actually can function actually logically. We have a small, like a small building, black, that is absolutely transformational. It's being both. It was a public office, an office space for public activity, and then it's turning into industrial. It was bought by a company, so we have making a big door into it. So it really does happen. It takes guts to totally change it.
Well, I think it's been a long session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.